Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special live recording of the Retail Exchange podcast. I'm joined today by Sophie Cunningham, Head of Digital Transformation at Fortnum Mason. Welcome. And also with Tom Langley, who is Head of Personalisation and Retail Media at John Lewis Partnership. It's great to have you both here with us today, and I think we're going to learn a lot from your insights. There will be an opportunity, as Mike has said. We'll bring him in, Mike Dowson, Managing Director of Trust, at the end of the session. We've got some very special questions for him and what they do. So I'm going to get straight into it. And for the benefit of everybody who's here with us today, could you first of all just give us a brief overview of your role, Sophie? What do you do and what are you responsible for?
Yeah, sure. So I won't spend a huge amount of time introducing Fortnum Mason, but it's a historic British retailer with 317 years old this year. And we've pretty much, for all of that history, been based out the same flagship Piccadilly store. We do also have an international business, so we sell wholesale and direct-to-consumer online marketplace. We've got a store and a restaurant in Hong Kong and a few restaurants in London as well. I look after digital transformation there, which is a nice fluffy term. It's difficult to describe what digital transformation is, but I would say it's more about transformation, which tends to have a very heavy kind of data systems and technology element to it. And that will be all of our back-end systems, so all of our ERP, supply chain systems, HR, IT, and legal, as well as then our kind of front end and our engagement with customers in store and online.
And Tom, how about you?
Yeah, so hi everyone, Tom Langley from the John Lewis Partnership. So the John Lewis Partnership is a partnership, so it's a partner-owned organisation of about 75,000 partners. And the partnership owns the two brands of Waitrose and John Lewis, which hopefully everyone's familiar with. So my role is the Head of Retail Media and Personalisation, and I guess in some ways they're quite separate things in how retailers think about them. So retail media, I guess primarily people think of how do you create monetization streams from your data and your assets, whereas personalization in terms of how do you actually kind of improve the customer experience. But actually in a former life working with dunnhumby and Tesco, we kind of found that retail media was an incredible kind of profit driver, but kind of somewhat dumb in how it was kind of putting assets in front of customers, whereas personalization was very expensive actually for the retailer, but wasn't obviously profitable. So actually what we found is the key thing is to bring those two things together and ensure that at what you're doing with suppliers and how you're thinking about retail media, you should also think about how does that come to life for customers and improve the customer experience. So it might seem somewhat unnatural for some kind of organizations, but for us, it's really important to think about how we improve the customer experience and then how do we also create supplier opportunities within that.
So we're here with some very good company today. The brands you work with are of high patronage and royal warrants afoot. So I think we're in for some very good insights during the conversation. So I guess the first question is, and it will give us some context for how we proceed, is what would you say is, in your separate views, what is digital's role in customer experience? You know, it's fast evolving, but where would you put a marker in the sand now?
So I would say that our digital strategy is quite clear that technology is there to enhance the customer experience. And a few ways that it kind of does that, I think it makes the journey in store really, really seamless so that customers can focus on kind of the emotion and the journey of shopping rather than on the mechanics. I think it enhances the kind of products that we can bring to customers, so things like personalized products themselves. Digital technology opens up a lot of avenues for new and exciting things that you can do with those products. I think it also allows us to reach more people than ever before and bring what used to be sort of one single store in London out to that international market and allow people, no matter where they are, to engage with that brand and also to consume our products and get those fulfilled in a way that's really convenient for them.
And Tom, same question.
Yeah, I agree with everything Sophie's saying. I think the kind of build, I suppose, for us and how do we think about digital, I almost try not to think about digital too much, but think about customer needs and ground yourself in what are you solving for the customer. So how am I making shopping easier and faster? How am I making shopping kind of getting better value, better service, and inspiring and engaging? So almost ground yourself in what are you trying to solve for the customer? And then how can digital really help you kind of evolve that journey? You know, I think of the organizations outside of retail are really setting the tone for what customer expectations are. So whether it's, how you search on Google and what you expect to return from your search through to Netflix recommendations, really customers' expectations are now heightened. And as retailers, we have to now kind of catch up and work kind of towards those expectations customers expect for, if you think about e-commerce and the expectation to get the delivery that day or the next day, and as a retailer, you have to very quickly, fast-paced, use some of the digital technology out there to keep up with customer demand.
And I guess in many ways, both of those answers are, I suppose, summarising more from almost a customer benefit side of it, more engagement, more experiential, more fun during the experience. But surely too, there's also another side of it, which is about the commercial optimization for the company and for the brands.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's right. I think it offers you so much opportunity to do things more efficiently when you use, whether it's, I kind of put data and digital in the same kind of sentence really, but I think just the simple thing of digital signage outside a store and what it offers you in terms of not having the kind of massive staff you need to go in and re-put in the kind of the old print signage that we used to have. You can centrally control digital signage, things like that. So it's just much more efficient. You need much less staff, but you need to be careful that I still think a lot of creative can look and feel better when it's physical. So how do you make sure that digital signage isn't just about efficiency and automation, but it's still about improving that customer experience and making it more engaging?
I'm sure you've both experienced the same as I have, the frustration perhaps of following people in the street which are, head down into their screens, they're in a different conversation somewhere else and you're just wanting to get by. Take that concept and bring it in store. How easy or difficult is it to get the customer engaged in what you're trying to get them to do versus what's already happening on their phones or their tablets? Surely it's pretty hard to actually get people's attention now, isn't it?
So I really don't have any problem with customers walking around the store on their phones. Actually, I love that people are, they have the ability to have that technology on them and engage with digital content while still being in a physical store. But I do think we need to differentiate between the customer who is online to shop and the platforms that they would use to shop and a customer that is there to research. And really that's what you see in store. It's a customer who sees a product on the shelf and they're wanting to learn more. It's that kind of research journey. I want to know more about specific ingredients or allergens within a product. I want to know about the story, how it's produced. I want to see if there's anything else that I can look around for and inspire me. And I think brands have a bit of a challenge if they've built up their online presence to be very e-com focused and not really around that customer research journey. So I think differentiating those two is quite difficult, but really key to making that engagement in-store online work.
And you touch on an important point there as to the role that digital services play in providing service versus those traditional interactions you might have got with a colleague in store. How do you see that? Is one complementary to the other? Is one a replacement for?
Different customers have different preferences, right? Some people don't want to interact with a colleague. Typically, when people come to a Fortnum store, that's one of the things they love. And I think technology for us can be a massive enabler for giving those colleagues the maximum amount of face time with the customer and really allowing them to provide that exceptional service. So there's the online technology for the customer, but also you drive a lot of that customer experience through the technology that your staff are using.
And Tom, I guess in the same scenarios, you'll probably find people are switching that kind of dynamic quite frequently as well, where they might have a physical question to a store partner, and then they want to get immersive themselves and dig a little bit deeper into some aspects.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you have to understand that customers are completely expecting seamless experiences. And I think it's useful to constantly ground yourself in data. So nowadays in stores, you'll be monitoring footfall and customers coming into store and then monitoring your baskets. So, typically in a big department store for us, we see a less than 30% conversion. So customers are using the physical store to still come and research, understand, browse, consider. And then online, again, it's kind of around, less than 50% of visits are converting. So what are customers there to do? And that's what we spend our time researching, right? Customers are there, they're trying to research about products. And to Sophie's point, people are walking around the store often actually just, it's not necessarily they're sitting there looking at prices of your competitors. They're quite often just looking for more information about the products. So you have to really embrace, you're not going to get away from customers are going to be staring at their phones. So how do you provide immersive content in that whilst also considering your store as a theatre. And that's the challenge in both of our brands are kind of premium brands. And, we do a lot of things with sampling in the Waitrose store for food, because what's the best way to get customers to try new food? It's to put it in their mouths, right, and try it and enjoy it. And then, in our John Lewis stores, how we reinvent space. So we've got our rooftop kind of bar on top of Oxford Street, and really thinking about how you make your stores an engaging experience space, not just a place to come and functionally shop.
And I think you rightly allude there to the fact that the use of digital has gone way beyond primary signage and wayfinding needs, and is now being actively integrated as part of the architectural landscape of departments and, in fact, a whole brand.
Yeah, exactly. I think, digital signage has gone on a bit of a journey, I think, of, typically, I think the starting place was to have the digital signage outside the front of the store and think of it as retail media more. So it's about an income stream. But actually, as we've learned through that, it's, you can create much more engaging content. It's much more efficient. And actually, then you can create reusable assets and things like that. So it's kind of, there's many reasons to use digital signage around the stores, but I think there's many mistakes you can make as well of just taking what you would have done on physical print and doing it in digital signage. That makes for fairly boring signage, right? I think what you have to do is go, right, this is now a new medium where I can make much more engaging, interactive, creative to really kind of draw customers in and inspire them.
And I guess one of the things that all brands will be trying to get right is that balance of what is the brand voice and which brand is speaking loudest. I guess in somewhere like John Lewis, which famously had a very democratic kind of almost brand base where no one brand was elevated over any other, that's a tightrope you must walk quite tightly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we talk to suppliers about is how do we grow together and how do we bring the best of both of our brands? Because often a supplier will just want to, really splash their brand at the front of, our store. But we have to remember we're trying to ensure we build and retain our brand heritage that the British customers love. And how do we use our brand as the kind of frame, and then bring the other brands to life? And I think particularly in grocery, where the Waitrose brand will help you elevate your brand position and actually the aspirational side of your brand to be part of Waitrose. Customers don't come to Waitrose for a kind of long tail of range. They come for a carefully curated range. They trust our buyers to have carefully selected the brands. And so we have to really protect our brand with how the suppliers show up as well inside that, whilst allowing the brands to express all of the work they've put into in creating new brands.
And Sophie, where do retailers get it wrong, I guess? Because look, when there is such a rich seam of content which is available, brands are keen to raid their archives to tell as many stories as possible. Surely it gets to the point where you could, be over ambitious and try and overlay or over communicate and over complicate something which actually needs to be pretty simple. Where do you think people can sometimes go wrong?
It's a pretty good question. So I think when you're building up digital content, to do it well, you have to put a lot of time into it. And that's in kind of not just creating the content, but then also how you store it, how you label it, how you maintain it over time and update it. So I think there's a real distinction to be made between content that you produce and use, and that's great, it worked, and then you'll get rid of it, versus stuff that you will keep around, and making sure that you invest in the things that you keep around. You do treat that as an asset as a business and you look after it. I think if you make that distinction, you can afford to spend that bit more time, and then you've got fewer assets but higher quality ones.
Right. And Tom, I suppose there's also a fine line between how you use digital media, whether it's about storytelling and brand journeys or whether it's about offers and promotions. Is there evidence that perhaps even within Waitrose and John Lewis that, one works better for each of the brands than the other?
Yeah, for sure. I think you've got to consider each of your categories and think about what the customer journey is in terms of consideration through to purchase. And if you think about grocery, typically 60 to 80% of your basket as a customer is the same week on week. So what's the most important thing to solve for customers to free up their time is to help them find the things they buy regularly really quickly and add them to their basket, because that then frees up time for them to spend time on inspiration, on search and things like that. So, grocery is a lot about getting your listing recommendations right. Whereas in non-grocery, that consideration journey is very different in terms of if I'm buying a telly, it's very hard to predict that before I search for televisions. So what you have to do in a non-food environment and a low purchase cycle is be very responsive to in the moment. so that you can then try and take someone to the right content where they're researching through to purchase. So I think we have to think about those kind of category dynamics differently across Waitrose and a department store like that.
So relevance to the moment, to the area, to the customer need, and trying to be as focused as you can.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a common mistake that retailers will make is they'll buy an enterprise piece of technology in the hope that it will solve all of their different channels. And that the reality is, if you spend time on, well, how do my customers interact with me as a brand? So you walk through all your pages on your website, from recommendations to content, to the store, to digital signage, to emails, and you'll get to quite a big list of touch points that customers have with you through their lives, from when they're at home browsing through to the store. And the reality is there's no silver bullet of technology that helps you plan and execute all those channels. So you have to be really careful to not be sold the dream that there's an enterprise piece of kit that's going to help you do all of that. So you also need brilliant planners, like brilliant people who can work with each of the channel technologies. So there is no CRM solution who also does digital recommendations brilliantly. And you need to have brilliant tech in each, for digital screens. That digital screen provider very rarely will also do CRM. So you've got to be, really considerate about being willing to work with each of the channels individually, rather than hoping for a silver bullet that just solves all your channels in terms of perfect execution for customers.
And I imagine one of the challenges there is actually bringing the different suppliers together who will cooperate and work together.
Absolutely. And I think being clear with your tech providers of how you want to work and how you want to plan across all of those different channels. And there are different ways you can execute personalization in some ways. So if you think about, I'm going to send you a coupon, I can do that, exactly at an individual level. I can send Sophie, Tom and Carl an individual set of offers. But at a store in a digital signage, I can't provide an individual customer a product. I have to target it to the store. So personalization exists at the point of execution, really, in terms of what level you can do the targeting. And so you need to explain that to all your tech providers to ensure you set up in the right way.
And each of these tech providers surely is the gatekeeper of their own technology. So there must be situations where people are somewhat reluctant to almost want to, partner and open up that knowledge, let's say, which is clearly of their, intellectual value of their own.
Yeah, exactly. And so as a channel technology provider, what are you trying to do? You're trying to win more retailers, and you're trying to improve the efficiency of the end-to-end flow of that channel. Like that's ultimately what you're going to be focused on. So as a retailer, you have to know that and don't try and break that. So you have to figure out how you're going to work with the point where you plan and you book into that channel, and not try and break the actual workflow of the tech provider, because you want to use the global products from that tech provider, because that's where they're going to be innovating. If you have some kind of version that is been kind of crafted for your organization, you're ultimately in 5-10 years time going to have some sort of out of date piece of kit.
Right. So you need partners which are engaged and cooperative.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent. Sophie, a different challenge I'm sure for you is the whole thing of how do you digitize tradition? Fortnum Mason been around for centuries, iconic flagship in Piccadilly. How on earth do you go about thinking about bringing those kind of stories into the modern age?
Yeah, so it's definitely a challenge for us. And I'd say that challenge is both physical, because we actually have a centuries-old store, and some of the furniture that we've got is decades old. So we have to be very careful about how technology fits around that.
So you can't just pull down ceilings and put in new Wi-Fi cabling. And
I think our CEO would have something to say about that.
Right,
sure.
okay.
But
I've touched a nerve there, haven't I?
We are allowed to put new wiring in, but we do have to be very careful about exactly how that's done.
Full respect to the plaster work.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got the physical challenges, but then I think you've also got the kind of cultural fit challenges, and it's how the technology kind of sits sympathetically with those heritage products and those heritage kind of brands and the look and feel of the store, and how that is kind of consistent. You can bring the online technology into the store. But I do think also digitizing tradition is, it's a massive opportunity for us as much as it is a challenge, because we're very lucky. We have this fantastic brand, this fantastic heritage, and people are actively looking to engage with that content. So digital, we definitely see it as an asset rather than a challenge, even though the actual implementation can be problematic at times.
And I guess one of the other challenges must be surely, for a business which has been around for so long and has done so well over so many years, is convincing other people within the leadership team about why this is important.
I mean, that's a really interesting point, because it was one of the things that I was concerned about when I joined Fortnum's, but it's not at all the case. I would say actually technology is very trendy, and in a lot of ways it's not very hard to sell to senior leadership. I think in terms of the output of what that technology gets you, people are really keen for it. But what is more challenging is explaining the work that needs to go in on the ground level to make it possible. So all of that kind of good data cleansing, data structuring, the architecture, the integrations piece, trying to make those quite complex and technical concepts simple to leadership and therefore get the investment at all stages of the project lifecycle, I think is challenging.
So essentially it's about getting people to think that it's not just about making a 10-second TikTok video.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in the nicest possible way, there are some fantastic suppliers out there, but you will find that senior people within a business receive a lot of sales pitches. And I think it's kind of setting a optimistic but realistic, this is what we can achieve and this is what it will get you, but it's not a magic bullet. It still needs all the good traditional business processes underlying it to get that value for the customer and the brand, alongside all the nice promises of where you'll get to and keeping that vision going with the groundwork to make it possible.
And Tom, I can imagine a different but similar challenge for you will be the partnership structure, in as much that you have many stakeholders. Perhaps there's the overarching partnership ethos and values, and then there's the individual brands, and then whichever of the products and services that you're trying to promote.
Yeah, exactly. And it has been a journey, I would say, the last couple of years on, I guess how the partnership thinks of itself in terms of how it's going to make money in the future. I think, this is not just a partnership piece, this is a retailer, globally of, around the globe in retail, profit is a challenge. In terms of buying and selling product and making money from that, it's become more and more challenging as marketplaces expand and they take more of the sales, they make it more convenient. It makes it harder for traditional retailers to make money. And I think, the industry does a good job on the press, but you essentially need to rethink the whole operating model of retail and how you make money. And that's where really retail media or its data services and starting to make money outside of buying and selling products to customers, because then that frees you up to have money to invest into providing brilliant customer experiences. And, I guess Amazon have kind of famously created the kind of advertising services and the billions they make in that money, but that then provides them the ability to keep prices really low for customers. And I think it's educating traditional retail leadership that you have to really think the fundamentals of how you're going to make money as a retailer.
And is that just essentially, in simple terms, about monetizing the content?
Not just content. I think you have to think about every asset you have as a retailer. So you have data assets. So we have a loyalty card, which collects a lot of data. So if you are a brand in Waitrose, typically you don't sell direct to customer. So you actually don't have a direct relationship with the customer to understand their behavior. And so as a retailer, I can tell you that, someone was previously buying Fairy, and over the last 6 months they've lapsed and they've gone to buy Finish. As a brand, you can't see that. So loyalty card data really helps you unlock that insight to help brands understand their customers. And then the assets then are, how do you then execute that? So as a retailer, you've got assets, through your CRM programs, through your stores. We have publications that are still really popular with our customers, through to then digital assets. So yeah, it's really thinking about your assets from understanding to activating customers and how valuable they are for the brands that we work with.
And it seems we're in a changing environment where perhaps we've gone from almost that passive but known data collection that customers would have been aware of, now to much more almost direct baiting of the customer. Tesco's Challenges initiative, which has just launched, buy 10 products and we'll tempt you with another 100 club card vouchers as a result of that. It's a much more almost aggressive stance on using loyalty and personalisation to sort of say, well, we won't just kind of, tempt you with a little bit of money off. We are directly incentivising you to buy these things for a reward.
Yeah, it's incredible to watch in the last 3 years. Kind of the tone was set by Tesco, really, of flipping from it being about personalised offers and things that are a bit under the radar to in your face club card prices. If you want this price, you need to swipe your card. So what that gives is Tesco go from kind of 60-ish, 70% swipe rates to kind of 90, 95, because why wouldn't you? you're suddenly saving £5 in your shopping basket. So I think loyalty and the mechanics are much more in your face.
And is some of that because the customer is happy now, that it's much more complicit in terms of the way that this is operating?
Yeah, I think complicit or sort of kind of numb to it a little bit now, maybe. But I think that you still need to be really considerate of your value exchange that you provide. So if you do this action, you provide me your data, I'm going to provide you a better experience. And that's what we're constantly careful of, is there has to be the right value exchange for a customer. I think digital is a great one of, why am I going to log in? I'm not necessarily going to check out, but why am I going to identify myself? And I think in exchange, you have to provide personalized recommendations. Previously you bought this goes really nicely with this. I think you have to be really careful of, what are you doing in exchange to get the data from a customer, so that they will log in, so that they will swipe their card, so you can collect that data, so that
But certainly the customer seems to be more willing to participate.
I think that's right. I think that, you see much less than when kind of the GDPR kind of movement happened. I don't know if it's 5-10 years ago, and it was kind of in the press and everyone was talking about data privacy. I think that's kind of dropped off in terms of the industry conversation. I think customers are more kind of agnostic to it now.
Yeah, and I think the whole kind of scandal around Facebook and data mining and data selling and all the rest of it didn't help.
Well, and if anything, Google and Facebook are the ones that have benefited most from that, because now if you want to buy media in both of those platforms, you can't use your data. It's very much a walled garden of, you have to essentially use their services more and more. So actually the people that have benefited most have been the people who caused the problems, right? It's an interesting one.
Switching focus a little, I guess, to kind of almost store experience, Sophie. There's increasing use of digital media, whether that's for wayfinding, storytelling, offers and promotions. We see it everywhere. In fact, just this week, JD Sports opened their largest ever store in Stratford. You've probably seen it. And it's been heralded as an existing store has had a digital uplift. Now, that's a new term for us all, I'm sure. What does it mean in reality? It means there's pretty much a screen with every piece of merchandising around the store. But surely it begs the question, when is too much too much? And when does all of that, whistles and flutes and gizmos become so overwhelmingly distracting that, yes, it looks amazing, but the primary objective going into the store and making a purchase is somewhat overshadowed perhaps by all of that show that's going on around. What do you think about that?
So I have to say, as a consumer, I think for me, some of those high-tech stores, that they are technology for the sake of technology, and you go there because you find the technology quite interesting and you quite like experiencing that when you're in store. That doesn't work for every brand. It certainly doesn't work for Fortnum Mason, where people come into the store because they are looking to engage with tradition.
And there's a certain pace to your store, isn't there?
Yeah, which ramps up at Christmas, I would say. But I think really, if I look at why our customers come into the store, they come in first time because they've seen the storefront. When they come back, it's because they've really enjoyed the service and the experience. And actually, one of the ways that I think we often don't land technology very well is by not really focusing on the people who are going to be using it at front of house. And if you're going to implement a technology, if you're going to implement some kind of new POS system or some kind of personalization using iPads or interaction with the colleague and the technology, you really need to put the time into training the colleagues how to make the most of that and what you're expecting the customer journey to be. And I think if we focus a little bit more on how the technology is used by our teams and a little less on just what the technology is, then it will land better for the customer.
And have you, in your role, had any notable fails or areas where the customers had a bit of backlash to something you've tried to do?
Yeah, so I think back to when we introduced our new app for personalisation. So those who've been to Fortnum's might have seen that you can personalise your champagne bottles. So you can get something like "Happy Birthday, Dad" written on it. So one of the things we really wanted to do was to offer customers more choice of personalisation, so more fonts, more label designs, the ability to visualise before they actually got it printed what it was going to look like so that they could revise it. We developed an app in-house that could do that, and we could display it to the customer on the iPad before we actually implemented it in front of them on the bottle. It was the first time a lot of our colleagues had used an iPad, actually, some of our older staff. So I think actually spending the time to kind of train that, what you did see was some of the old staff didn't use the iPad to start with. They went with the old system. They would do it online, and the customer wasn't actually receiving the benefit of that work that we'd put in.
So the confidence in the colleagues wasn't there to deliver the service.
Yeah, and I think there's no substitute to actually, boots on the ground and getting down and showing people on the front of house how they're going to use that technology. I don't think kind of online learning cuts it. I think you have to sit there and do it with them and do it together.
And Tom, when for you is too much too much?
Yeah, I think one of the things we've been talking about, and I've seen it kind of talks about the last 5-10 years in terms of how you use digital signage and how can you personalize that experience, by recognizing the person in front of it, whether it's because of their gender or it's actually the person. I kind of think you end up doing things that are a bit creepy, but also you end up distracting yourself from just using the technology to create brilliant creative that works for most people. And I think actually there's kind of been a lot of distraction of how do I link up and personalize the digital signage in store, as well as how we're seeing it on display on the website and things like that. And I think for me, the art of using digital technology in store is about adding to the theatre, adding to that kind of in-store customer experience, not worrying so much about responding to the person exactly in front of it.
Because sometimes it can feel intrusive, can't it? I remember when a famous American coffee chain started asking people for their Christian name to add to their cups. The amount of anxiety and discontent it created on something so small.
Yeah, and it's funny how many coffee shops do that now, and it's sort of accepted, whereas when they started doing it, it was an uproar about it. But I guess customers get used to it. Maybe it's a more efficient way of giving the coffees out, right? So it's partly how you take customers on that change journey as well, because most people are resistant to change at the beginning, right?
Now, I think both of you also have footprints in other markets around the world. Are there challenges, particular challenges there to, digitising on-screen content? Clearly some parts of the world, I guess, have got sensitivity about certain kinds of imagery or use of language or even music rights. How do you navigate that horizon?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I kind of go to a former life of working with dunnhumby and retailers, and one of the things you have to consider is how e-commerce is different in each market. Because I think as a British person, you assume that e-commerce is the kind of future and it's the way people are going to shop groceries. But actually, in America, that's not true, right? E-commerce and grocery is a really slow growth because it's part of the weekly shop to go to the store. It's also how America is geographically in terms of people live miles away from stores. So doing pick, pack, deliver, that last mile delivery is really inefficient. So I think you have to really consider what are you trying to solve digitally for the customer. Is it about necessarily e-commerce, or is it about just ensuring customers, when they do their research, you've got brilliant content, you've got all your store opening hours, all the basics of why am I going to a store, your website, to think about why would I consider shopping with you. So I think it's thinking about what are customers wanting to do with their digital experience in each of the markets.
And how close culturally do you have to get to what is almost the norms within those markets to make sure you get it right and don't, hit sensitivities that you don't need to?
Yeah, I think it's super important. I think, China's probably one of the markets where many retailers have really struggled because they've gone in and assuming they can do a European kind of hub and spoke kind of DC approach. And that's just not how China works. China is lots of small vans and suppliers will directly provide to stores over there. So, as a big retailer that's European and you're used to all your efficiencies are in the process of creating your depots and then huge trucks going out to those stores, you have to go and locally, culturally understand how the stores are working, how people are shopping, to set yourself up in those markets.
Yeah.
And Sophie, you have brand partnerships in the Middle East, Far East, North and South America. How do you modify content for those markets?
There's no one size fits all, is the truth. And there's no substitute for people who understand that market as a consumer being able to advise you on what's appropriate. And I think what we're really trying to do as a business is build up that kind of suite of solutions so that as markets change and as we enter new markets and as we learn about the markets we're already in, we can flex with ease rather than being tied to a single model.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing in kind of the Middle East and also parts of Asia is they're much more brand-led than the UK. A lot of our, whether it's in department stores or in grocery, the UK population will often go and buy your own range. Whereas in UAE, you find that, over 90% of products in stores will be branded. And so then it's, a lot of it's the trust in the overall brand and how you build your brand perception over there, as part of that.
And the other thing that I would add is that it can be fantastic to leverage those international customers when they come to visit you in the UK. And that's really where some of the richness of information that you can capture in a physical environment, what customers are looking at, what kind of products they are interested in when they see the full range that we stock in store. What would they be interested in taking back to their market? Like, what's the differences in engagement? You can do a direct comparison there. It's really helpful.
And do customers in different parts of the world respond to almost real-time offers differently? I imagine that, some markets are very responsive in terms of deal of the day or this week's specials.
Yeah, I think so. I think in the UK, we don't typically have the kind of weekly flyer where you sit and you look through all the different flyers from the retailers. Whereas if you go to North America, or even as close as Ireland, people will sit there and look through their flyers, which used to be paper, is now often digital.
Certainly Australia is a huge market for that.
Exactly. And actually, UK is almost an anomaly where we don't really do that, and we kind of don't like that kind of way of browsing. Whereas in other markets, it's very much around how do you digitize that kind of old, person flicking through the kind of coupon booklets and stuff like that into, not just a kind of a turnable kind of digital tablet reader, but actually make it much more immersive in how people are they're looking at their set of offers. They can load it to their loyalty card and make that a really seamless experience. I think the challenge of digitizing loyalty, and I think at Waitrose we felt it, where how do you make sure it's still really seamless? Because actually having a bit of paper, quick swipe at the tills, it's quite easy actually, but it's expensive doing all the print. So what you have to do in the digital experience is making sure it's still really seamless, and ideally the customer only has to swipe once.
As a Waitrose shopper, I have experienced the pain of the customer in front of me who is trying to upload their voucher wallet that isn't connected to Wi-Fi, that doesn't quite then know what to
exactly.
do. And the levels of frustration and anxiety building in the line behind.
Yeah, and did we go too soon? Maybe. Probably did. We to the Wi-Fi point, how do we make sure we now have good Wi-Fi in all our stores and it's easy to log in? And then, the second point, Sophie was mentioning earlier, but who are the biggest advocates you'll have around loyalty? It will be your store partners and your store colleagues. They will be the ones getting excited in front of customers. Make sure you swipe your card. Did you know you've got an offer over there? Your partners in store are the most important people to become your advocates.
Can I just say, I'm so disappointed that you've now digitised the Waitrose loyalty card to your coffee machine. So I can only now take one serve per day, whereas before I would have happily wandered in 2 or 3 times a day and had another cup.
Yeah, that's right. We've had to kind of work hard on our kind of coffee and our newspapers. Like the British population, the people that are using it, they absolutely love the free coffee and newspapers. But I guess the challenge for us is how do we get it cost neutral? We brought in Cafe Nero to change some of the dynamics of it. We're getting there, and we're trying to get the right thing for each of the customer groups. I think the key thing for us is who are the customers that want 3 or 4 coffees a day versus the customers that don't care about having a coffee.
I do actually spend money as well.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's right. So, and I think it's knowing that, building up that knowledge about each individual customer to say what's the right thing for that customer. Actually, it's a free coffee. Whereas another customer, it's actually just more important to get some money off for their food or.
And I think what you're talking about there is really that deep dive about who is the customer and why are they shopping with us. And are there any particular benefits, you think, Tom, to really kind of almost trying to follow and get real-time customer engagement?
Yeah, I think so. I think, the first thing is to build up your kind of, I would call it a customer DNA. So everything you know about customer, how can you get it in one place? So yeah, what you're doing in real time, but what did you do last week? How long have you been shopping with me? Did you have a bad experience at some point? So I think it's not only to respond to what you're doing in real time, but to know everything I know about you and how you've interacted with me as a brand. Because I think if you focus just on real time, you're just going to respond to the fact that you're now searching, you'll do something in real time. But actually, as a customer, you want to know that I've been loyal for the last 2 years, and if I have a bad experience, you should do something about it. So we're working on both, where we try and ensure we have a really good customer DNA table that can then be used by all the channels, whilst also to the point earlier of in some categories you have to respond really well in real time to what someone's looking for right now. So you have to try and find that blend of looking longitudinally at a customer over the long term, as well as what are you doing right now, and try and find the blend of those two things.
And Sophie, I can imagine for you, one of those extra levels of complexity is the fact that you have so many tourists as customers. So people who are essentially, very infrequent shoppers, and therefore how you can build up much of a profile about them.
Yeah, it is harder, though. I would say even with our UK customers, the shopping frequency at somewhere like Fortnum's is not huge. So we do have a challenge in terms of what is the lifetime shopping experience of a customer. Since we've brought in, digital technology, people may only have shopped with us twice, 3 times. Lots of customers buy once. We have a smaller data set. We probably still have a bigger data set than we're using. I think actually a lot of the constraints around customer analytics, customer segmentation, that customer view are driven not by the data you have available, but by your ability in-house to manipulate and work out the questions you want to answer before you play with that data.
But I guess the value for you is about building your database in terms of all those shoppers, whether they are online, offline, in-store, whether they're in an airport terminal or whether they're in Piccadilly.
Yeah.
Because for you, it's going to be things, those one-off sales around the year, special hampers at Christmas or treats around festivals, etc. That's probably the sweet opportunity space, I guess.
Yes, and I think we can capture some of that data. On our international customers, there are ways to work with, for example, your payment provider to make sure that you're building up from every kind of touch point where you can interact with those customers. There's obviously a lot that you can do on the e-commerce side to just understand what content people are engaging with from which locations. We did trial some stuff in store around kind of capturing customer details and getting people to sign up with QR codes. We can obviously, when people go onto the Wi-Fi, we try and capture a little bit of information about them. But I think it's a balance for us, until we know that we've got something really valuable to do with that information, it's more of a barrier and you're actually taking a little bit away from that customer experience by trying to capture that data. So we try and do it in the ways that are as seamless for the customer as possible.
I'm sure you both face at different times in the year and different conversations with people internally. The cost of customer acquisition never falls, but so too the cost of loyalty is increasing. What's your take on that? Why should you invest in loyalty?
Yeah, it's a great question in terms of how do you kind of look after the top of the funnel as well as the kind of bottom, right? And I think the reality for both our brands is that most people know John Lewis, Waitrose, Fortnum. So, I think you just have to, really think about your brand and what are you trying to do in terms of achieve for customers. I think with a Waitrose shopper and how you shop grocery, typically, you're not going through Google and searching, broccolis and then going to the kind of cheapest website. You're typically going to retailer.com. So we find customers will typically come straight to waitrose.com. So in a Waitrose example, things like PPC and investing into kind of paid media to drive people to the store isn't the way to invest. It's much more important to have that real deep conversation in loyalty to our loyal base and encourage customers to do that so we can serve them in that space. Whereas in John Lewis, we have to use loyalty and kind of paid media and acquisition in a different way because typically customers are starting their search journey for a television or for a lot of higher tech purchases in a search engine like Bing or Google. And so we have to be there front of mind as part of that, Google shop, for example. And so, for us, it's finding that balance in John Lewis as one of our kind of, I suppose, one of our secret weapons with loyalty to, get people into the store, to have a free coffee and cake and really kind of create that, brand loyalty. And I'm proud to be part of the club, as part of it, but we still have to find that balance of ensuring that we're still where customers are when they're searching.
And I think, there's 2 things that I would want to say about loyalty. And the first is that we talk a lot about loyalty in the context of loyalty schemes, but really, for me, the more important thing is old school brand loyalty. People coming because you've delivered an amazing product, an amazing experience at the right price, and that we shouldn't forget that actually just doing the basics really, really well is what drives a lot of that long-term loyalty.
So really, you're talking about satisfaction as well as other things.
Completely, yeah. It's that trust. It's that trust and that desire to come back and shop. That's what I think of first when I think of our loyal customers. And then when you talk about kind of loyalty schemes, Fortnum's taken quite a different approach to it. So we don't have a loyalty card. We don't offer kind of money off on the basis of being a member of a loyalty scheme. But we do want to recognize that some of our customers want to engage with us in a slightly deeper way. And there are kind of experiences or events that we can offer to people or products, opportunities that we can offer to people outside what many of our more casual customers can experience. So that's kind of where we've taken the loyalty scheme, is that slightly more premium, slightly more exclusive opportunity to engage with the brand.
And are there any particularly successful methods or things you've done which, help create that seamless journey from sofa to store? Where you're not purely having a customer that's engaging through their smartphone at home, but they're coming in and they get the free coffee or the beauty demo or participate in Members Week, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, I think to Sophie's point, I think you have to, especially in a premium retail, it's like, what are the member exclusives? So one we did last year was we had Charlotte Tilbury herself come into our Oxford Street store. And so it was an exclusive for John Lewis loyalty card members to come to. So we had 100 or so people live in the store. But what we had to do was build the whole event around it in terms of the CRM, to send an email to our members to let them know we're doing it. Through to then, bringing customers into the store, and then the post event of using all the content that we created through the event.
So it's real 360 engagement.
Yeah, exactly. But such excitement of having Charlotte herself in the store and doing a beauty event, and you come in and get done up and get a load of free products at the back of it. And I think that's for me the difference of seeing loyalty at a premium retailer, where it really is about member exclusivity more than at
just money
Tesco
off.
and Sainsbury's, where it's much more functional, right? It's a functional brand, rather than we have NPS scores of 40 plus for our kind of both our brands. So customers love the brand as a UK consumer, and so how do we use that differently in loyalty is the key thing, really.
And that's where the personalisation element becomes really key, because the greater you know your shopper, the more understanding you have what will the triggers be to get them in.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think that's the really important, finding a balance of, even as a traditional retailer, how do you just ensure that you're making it easy and seamless and fast for customers and using the data in the right way? There's so many tech providers out there, and customers' expectations to the kind of the top of the conversation. The expectation's been set for you to make this personalized, easy. Online, you have, tens of thousands of products and SKUs. As a customer, I don't want to have to search through that myself. I want you to help me find and navigate to the customers that I'm going to like and enjoy and find interesting.
And when we think about digital screens in store, Sophie, whether that's used as part of a retail environment solution or whether it's about a piece of tactical marketing, are there any pointers that you would suggest around the creation of content? Because clearly, unlike TV ads where you're literally 3 meters away from it, literally eyeball to eyeball, there's many more distractions in a store. So what works best in your experience around getting the content creation right?
It's the obvious things, really. It's think really hard about what you want to put on that screen and what you want the customer to take from it before you start creating content. And I think that there's quite a clear distinction for me between signage that's there to inform. In our food and drink studio, we have what's going on in that studio. We have scannable QR codes so that you can book tickets for it. It's got a nice schedule of events. It looks very much like a printed sign would. Potentially, it can be more flexible. It can have more content on it. We can update it and improve it. That's very different from where we're using digital screens to, for example, almost as artwork, as displays, and using that to provide the kind of product or supplier information to bring some of that story behind the product to life in a way that is more engaging than a simple print poster would be. Actually, the imagery can be really stunning, and it can be updated and it can be novel. So yeah, it's knowing what you want to get from that sign before you implement it.
And I guess being very clear about both the scope and limitations of that particular use of the media in that situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's a beautiful sunny day in London today. It's still late in the morning. How do you start to think about the day part, the weather? Retail is so responsive to weather because it's responsive to people's mood, and so how do you start to use and think about, what's going on for the customer? So we've done a lot of work on in the morning, talking about our lunchtime deals, and when we've done a lot of work on our new deals through to the evening, then changing the content. And it's making sure you don't just treat it as a billboard, but you treat it as actually this is much more flexible in, day part. My team laugh at me for using the terminology of day part, but what time of day is it that you're considering? But also then, you're from Norwich, Carl, how do you use, flexible content, say, hey, Norwich, and make it much more immersive, draw people in through the content and the creative in a different way to what you can in print.
For me, one of my creepiest digital experiences was actually in Burberry, and I'll kind of call it out for what it was. They were an early adopter of RFID and put that extensively into Regent Street. I found it very, very odd walking around a department where the screens would change to reflect what I was wearing, and have I thought about buying the next thing to go with it? It felt very intrusive.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I feel about trying to respond to the customer. I feel like I don't know, I think there's other things you can do that are probably more impactful at this time. I think if a customer wants to identify, I actually think about in Waitrose, we use still predominantly cardboard around the store to do our signage. And we are always thinking about how do we transition to be more digital. But what you have to think in a grocery store is where people have long dwell times. So for us in Waitrose, where we massively overtrade is like fine wines. And actually it's an area where you do dwell because you want to find more content about the product. So there are parts of the customer journey where people have longer dwell times because they're researching, they're considering, they're thinking, and how can you build digital journeys into that versus I'm walking down the cereal aisle, I just want to pick up the 3 or 4 cereals that I buy for my family every week. And there isn't that time to capture kind of someone's imagination, and therefore printed cardboard is still just a much more efficient way to get things in store. So I think really thinking about what parts of the store and the customer journey are the best places to digitize first.
And I guess one of the things that's changing as well now is clearly there's a lot more automation involved in the content production and also content updating. And AI is also stepping in now to do some of that work too. Have either of you dipped your toe into those spaces yet where you're almost physically letting go of the reins and letting the technology do some of the heavy lifting?
So I think it's massively important that we build a workforce in the future that knows how to experiment with and utilize these tools. And I think any business that doesn't enable that kind of playing now is going to find itself much slower to innovate than those that do. I would say it's not in production yet. For us, it's something we play with internally. It can get you 50 to 80% of the way there, and then really free up your people to do that kind of last piece of work. So I never really see it kind of automating the end-to-end process.
There'll always be some human intervention, even just to check.
Completely, but I think it will allow people to produce a load more content per person and to innovate a lot faster, and therefore to end up with a much better output with less time and fewer hours to put into it. So I'm really excited about where it's going.
And Tom, a big organisation, many departments, everyone presumably with a long list of content needs. Surely it's the easiest thing to say, oh, look, write me an AI brief and we'll just send it over.
Yeah, exactly. And so I suppose where do we use more, I guess what I would describe as machine learning and kind of data science is in product recommendations and loyalty. So where, what am I showing a customer? I'm showing them a pretty simple piece of content, but what I'm trying to do is curate the right list of things for you as a customer. So we use a lot of algorithms, and you can't possibly as a person sit there and curate an exact range for each customer. So people have to trust the data science there. I think in content where, we're on a bit of a journey of exploring, but the challenge is, I guess, on, retaining kind of our brand image and thinking about that and taking our teams on a journey. So I'd say on the content side, it's a much earlier stage in the journey. I think there are other problems in retail that are more interesting to solve with AI and machine learning before probably the content. Think about how many teams are involved in merchandising and buying and ranging your store, pricing, shelf edge labeling, things like that, where I think there's probably more problems that in front of you that data science can solve than necessarily content.
My final question to both of you, and this is it's a quick fire response. It's almost a game. Am I going to call it overrated or underrated? So I'm going to take each of these at a time, and I want a simple one-word answer. So interactivity, overrated or underrated?
Underrated.
Underrated?
Yeah, underrated.
Okay, why?
So with all of these, I think my answer is going to be underrated, but with care. So I think it's fantastic to have people engaging with a brand, and I think that gives them the ability to personalize in the way that suits them as a customer. But I think also people come to a brand because actually we've got a fantastic team of people that curate the right content for them, and they're there to shop the brand because they know that's what they want. So just be careful not to make it too consumer-led.
Yeah.
Okay, next one. So overrated, underrated, live streaming.
Underrated.
Overrated for sales, underrated for engagement.
Okay, so why underrated, Tom?
So I think people, when they think about it, they almost think about the old TV channels and QVC and shopping that way. Whereas actually these days, when you see how much content is generated by brilliant influencers on TikTok, on Instagram, and that kind of ability to create that shoppability of those channels. So I think the key thing is to use the channels now where the customers are, where people are, to create that shoppability through those channels rather than kind of doing it in a more traditional manner.
Okay, final one is then, overrated or underrated in terms of user-generated content?
Overrated.
Okay.
I'm torn on this. I think overrated in grocery, underrated in non-grocery.
And of course, one way you have to be quite careful. We've obviously seen recent images which were user-generated, which caused a fair degree of controversy. The dust is settling, but still the jury is out.
That's the bit I'm actually less worried about. So I think by kind of being on the market, you have to kind of put your brand out there a bit, and we're careful about the content that we produce ourselves. But I think in some ways you have to let people be a little bit playful with it. I just think that, again, sometimes people want to engage with user-generated content. It's authentic, it's novel, it gives a different take on how people are actually using the product. But equally, sometimes they want to engage with brand-generated content, and that is okay too.
Great. And all of them, of course, come with a certain degree of risk in terms of how they're executed. I'm now going to bring and welcome onto the stage Mike Dowson, who is the MD of Trust. Mike, you've heard what they have to say in terms of the future of digitizing retail. What do you think?
To be quite honest, it's been fantastic. Just half an hour, 40 minutes listening to very similar views coming from very different brands in some respects. And it's really interesting because there's a lot of gems in what you've been talking about, the things that you are wrestling with on a daily basis. And as consultants and as facilitators of technology, they're the conversations that we want to have the deep dive and the special time aside to discuss, because there's a lot of things on both sides of the equation as a supplier and as a consumer of technology. That you need proper time for engagement. And I think where we as a supplier have struggled in recent past is where people are coming with very preconceived ideas about how things should happen and how they can happen in their minds or in the way in which they've architected it. And then you get to the practicalities of landing it and it fails because there are some fundamental things that have been missed, they've been overlooked, they've been taken for granted. And the top end, the digital things, all the fluffy things you've been talking about, the engagement piece and all the content creation and AI is beautiful stuff. But actually there's a foundation that is an absolute prerequisite that you cannot forget. It's a bit like coming here today. I can have the best electric car in the world with the fanciest dashboard and self-drive, but if the car is on a road that's full of potholes and the tarmac's displaced all over the place, I've got a horrendous journey, and I may not actually get to the end of my journey. And the foundation is key, and I'll talk a little bit about that shortly, because that's where we're seeing traction and success, is where we get that proper engagement, and then let the free spirits have their way, because they've got a better chance of landing.
Great. Well, look, it's been a tremendous conversation. Final question to all of you, and it would be remiss of me not to try. This is the part where I want to find out what is exciting you most about what development you're working on and what can we expect to see launched, even if you can just give us some top-line headlines in the next few months. So, Tom, what can we expect that's going to excite us from JLP, either Waitrose or John Lewis?
So, well, actually, we've just launched, and we've been doing a lot of work in Waitrose in launching kind of new brands. And so I don't know if you were looking for a product, but we've just done loads of work for the last 5 years with Langley and bringing his products to life in a Waitrose store as an exclusive range. Bringing, I guess, a much loved restaurant kind of brand into the retail environment and helping them bring that to life. So, how do we tell his brand story and bring it to life in the right way, so that customers kind of engage? And I think that's a big thing for us is bringing brands to life through kind of Waitrose in the right way.
And this is an area where you can really take some leadership and differentiate, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the bit for us, is when you are a new brand and you're trying to establish yourself as a kind of a premium brand and you want to hold your brand position high, it's all about anchoring. So that first impression a customer has. And if you come to a Waitrose and you frame it within our brands, customers will bring that trust that they have in our brand to the brand that we're elevating. So in that early days of kind of new product launches, which are really hard in grocery and in beauty as well, I think we help brands to establish their brand position out there.
Great. And for you, what's coming, or what's keeping you awake at night?
So I am really excited about the work that Fortnum's has on the cards in food and drink. And we have quite a history in food and drink. We're known as the first importers of Heinz baked beans to the UK, also known as the inventors of the Scotch egg. And I think there is a lot of innovation that we're looking to bring to the food and drink scene. And in particular, some of the work that our producers and suppliers and buyers do behind the scenes, the work that they put into the kind of sustainability of their products, the sourcing and the quality control, I feel like technology has the ability to surface those much better than we ever have been able to for consumers. So I would say if you're a bit of a foodie, Fortnum's is going to be an interesting place over the next year or two.
Amazing, great. So two very, very inspiring food-related tempters there for us. Thanks so much to Sophie Cunningham from Fortnum Mason, and similarly to Tom Langley from John Lewis Partnership, looking after both brands, John Lewis and Waitrose. I'd like to end this special episode of the Retail Exchange in association with Trust, and thank you for your attendance. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.